Price, one of your hosts, along with my colleague, Mr. Anthony Cusimano here. Welcome to
Nice.
today's live event. So essentially what we're going to do today is have an awesome discussion with a very special guest we'll bring on here momentarily. But before we get things started, just to remind everyone, we are simulcasting on several different platforms. We're on LinkedIn Live, we're on YouTube Live, and we're also streaming on X, formerly known as Twitter. So please keep this interactive. Hopefully we cover a lot of topics today that pique your interest. If you have any questions from anybody on the panel, be sure to engage in the chat. So we're going to have moderators standing by, and we can also monitor the chat feed here on our side. So with that said, Anthony, do you know where your kids are?
My kids, Matt, I thought we were talking about data.
Oh,
Firstly, I gotta give Matt some props here because I had not heard that statement in so long. I was like, what? That's a throwback, but a good one and perfect for this month and this conversation. It's not only spooky season, but it's also Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And truth be told, I think a lot of people don't know where their data are.
That's very true. So in the spirit of spooky, let's change up and get a little spooky here with our titles.
I like it.
So a couple of things just to bring everyone to the same page here before we bring in our special guest. And Anthony, I'm sure there's some of those out here or out there who have not joined a stream with us before.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just learning that Object First has delivered a solution to the market that is the best storage for Veeam. Can you share with the audience just briefly, what it is that we offer and why we do it?
I sure can. There's nothing scary about this. Object First and UTB, which stands for out of the box immutability, is the best storage for Veeam. And I can say that statement with a lot of certitude because it's founded by the same two individuals who founded Veeam 17 plus years ago, Ratmir Timoshev and Andrei Baranov. Just the same way they saw the need for a great VMware type backup ecosystem all those years ago when it didn't exist. Now they wanted to create a ransomware proof on-prem object storage target exclusively built for Veeam. So if you haven't seen or heard of it before, UTB, which again stands for out of the box immutability, is secure, simple, and powerful. And it is tuned and tailored specifically to give you a zero access, highly usable, highly performant, 15 minutes to set up backup appliance that only works for your Veeam backup and recovery environments.
Yeah, love it. So I think it's about time we bring on this special guest. And if you've seen, obviously, our graphics on the socials, you already know who I'm talking about. But one of the really cool things for me is in a former life, I actually spent the past decade over on the Veeam side of the house. And I've known Scott from the day I started working at Veeam. He was there, all the way through essentially my tenure. So it's about 15 years now, I guess, that he and I have been buddies. So let's just go ahead and bring on Mr. Scott Lillis, President and CEO over at the Lillis Tech Group.
Welcome. Hey, Matt. Good to see you guys. How's it going?
It's going well. It's going well. So, it's an absolute pleasure of us to have you on. I really think there's going to be a lot of good stuff we can talk about. And really to get things started, why don't you introduce yourself for those who don't know you and talk a little bit about your company?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So I'm Scott Lillis. I run the Lillis Technology Group. My company is 100% focused on Veeam professional services. Prior to that, as Matt mentioned, I was with Veeam for 8.5 years. I joined early on in November of 2009. I was roughly 115th or so employee at Veeam and one of 6 architects in North America at the time. Quickly moved up the food chain to VP of Engineering for North America, and during my tenure, built the SE organization to over 120 when I left in 2018. So great ride, great people, seat at the table. Mentioned Anthony talking about the founders, Ratmir and Andre, and clearly the excitement that I'm seeing for Object First and UPI is, had a firsthand seat at the table and seeing how they operated. So it's a great solution. We'll get into that a little bit, but appreciate the opportunity to be on here. Like I mentioned, my team, when I started it, kind of pivoted to this 100% Veeam services organization. So on average, our architects have over 100 implementations under their belt, and anything Veeam we dive into. So we work from small, medium-sized clients up through state, local education, and large enterprise. We've been involved in several Fortune 50s. So up and down the stack, we we'll interact with them in Veeam, and it's exciting to be here. And having been a launch partner with Object First, really excited. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, we couldn't be more excited. And you talk about your company is really exclusively focused on Veeam. Guess who else is? We are.
Gotta love synergies.
Exclusively for Veeam, right? And one of the things while we're talking about Veeam, just 2 days ago they had this huge resiliency summit, and I watched all the sessions there that I was able to attend, and so much goodness came out of that. And really the whole message, which coincidentally is really why our company was founded, is security and ransomware and data threats in general. Scott, what was your takeaway from the resiliency summit? What really stood out to you?
Yeah, I thought they did a fantastic job with it, and really excited about 12.1 coming out and where they're strategically taking the solution, right? Because as you mentioned, it's very much about security right now. And we heard that echoed up and down, not only with new capabilities around, virus scanning in line and integrating with other security vendors and SEIM and things of that nature, but really, to kind of evolve what was the traditional landscape, right? It started that, when I used to explain backup, it was the goaltender on your soccer team or football team, depending on where you're coming from, right? So, you needed a great one to prevent the ball going in the net. But, as things have evolved, I think that goaltender has moved into immutable storage, which we'll talk about a little bit. That's your table stakes. And I think it's taken the breadth of data protection and moved it forward, right? We have all the data captured. Now, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to be more proactive? So a lot of the strategy was very apropos to what we're seeing in the business, and what we're hearing from clients. The ransomware epidemic, as we'll call it, is not slowing down. And I think one thing that really resonated with me was that these attackers and bad actors are hitting the backup environment first, right? Their level of sophistication is increasing dramatically. And at the end of the day, once they've got you on the hook, and you can assume they're already embedded, they just haven't triggered it yet, right? Or you have to anyway. It's leverage for them. If they know you've got recoveries ready to rock and roll, it's not as powerful a statement to try to get the ransom paid. So they do focus on that to the extent where, 2 years ago, we often got pulled in on tactical ransom type of scenarios where, hey, we've been compromised. We just need help restoring, all hands on deck. Can you help? We rarely see that anymore because they've either got the backups if they're not sitting on immutable storage. So that was a really strong message. And then I think the steps that bring a company to that scenario were also discussed. So.
Now, I came in on the tail end of the Veeam Resiliency Summit, but something I heard that I'd like a little more clarification on is this thing called it's 4 eyes authorization. See, when I was a kid, I used to wear glasses and they all just called me 4 eyes. So I had my eyes lasered not to do that anymore. But apparently this is good now. Can someone explain to me what that is?
Yeah. So I was watching that too. And, obviously the whole thing around Veeam and V12 and 12.1 is a big increase in focus on security and making sure that backups are protected. Because as you said, Scott, essentially the attack vector is just increasing, and the percent of attacks specifically geared towards repos is rising exponentially as well. So essentially the whole 4 eyes idea with Veeam is it's almost like 2 keys, right? There's got to be one person, let's say the backup administrator, let's say they decide to initiate a delete on some of the backups. Well, that goes into a pending state before that action is actually carried out until a second set of eyes actually goes in and confirms, yes, I agree, we should remove that data. And then only after that second person gives the authorization will Veeam actually start to delete the data. Now, keep in mind, that's a very important safeguard to keep data safe, but it still can be deleted even if you had 2 malicious bad actors, right? So that's why immutability still plays a key role there. And one of the other things, I'm curious on your take on this, Scott, too, is the whole inline detection that Veeam is adding in. And I mean, it's next level stuff with AI, where they're basically adding in 12.1 the ability to detect malicious activity during processing. So as an example, if a whole slew of files got deleted and that was suspect, they can flag things like that now in the latest releases, which is absolutely crazy, but super important to stay protected from A to Z.
Yeah, and I think it's leveraging what's already at play within the environment and getting more value out of it, right? So people that are on the front lines of your cybersecurity war, and that's what it is. We're all at war. Are looking at any sensor and any data point that they can get, and clearly, backups touching every bit of your net new data every single day. When you drive that through an inference engine or entropy, if you ever want to really dig down a propeller head rat hole, pretty amazing stuff. But looking for things that change, that are anomalous, so that people know and can take action. Take a look. This doesn't seem right, and then the ability to fail back to the last known state before that anomalous behavior started happening is
Yeah.
A huge benefit. So I think another takeaway that I had was kind of merging what were traditionally your security teams, your CISSP driven, and data protection. They were always kind of two separate silos that kind of connected at points. And, I could talk firsthand on when we do security assessments for Veeam, we do have to interact with security teams, with network teams, and depending on the size of the organization, they could become quite siloed, right? So I think the tools are starting to interact more closely, being able to offload some of this. Hey, we're seeing something anomalous, moving that over to an SEIM platform so that your tactical triage people could take a look at it, some of the partnerships that they've got. It's all expanding what you can do with data protection, and the data's already there, right? It's ultimately a data lake. How it behaves is already there. So adding a lot of these enhanced techniques through AI, like you mentioned, is really a huge benefit because, again, it's an arms race with these bad actors. They're chasing 0-day threats. They're implementing it, and they're watching your business. They may lay dormant for months or years, right? They may wait until, if your company's not taking the economic situation well right now and, are struggling, they're probably not going to slap you with a multi-million-dollar ransom, but they're going to wait until they say, hey, look, Crunchbase, they just got another 50 million. Now let's drop it. Right. So the level of sophistication and the human interaction is tremendous. So, that was another clear way.
Totally agree. And, that to me, that kind of begs the question, is immutability really enough? I mean, what's your take on that, Anthony?
So, Matt, we work for a company that focuses on immutability, so much so that it's in the acronym of our name. But in everything I've seen in the IT administrative world today, I think a lot of people just assume that immutability is immutability and all immutability is created equal. And that's just not the case. We've talked about this before, but many people don't realize that immutability can actually come in two flavors in a lot of the different vendors out there. You hear about governance mode and compliance mode, and they are essentially what you think. Governance mode meaning that there is a governing body that can choose to turn it off if they would like. And anytime you have that option, that administrative power that can come in and flex administrative privilege, you have essentially created a non-immutable storage space. So for me, the definition of immutability means it cannot be altered or changed. So I would argue, unless it's in compliance mode, it's not truly immutable. In addition to that, we've been doing a lot of research and thinking about zero trust recently here at Object First. And I would almost argue that it's not truly immutable unless you're also following zero trust principles. And what I mean by that is keeping your immutable data segmented and separated away from the backup environment. You put all those eggs in a single basket, and one compromise leads to a snowball of compromises. So being able to take those segmentations, create those resiliency zones, those failovers, understanding the importance of 3-2-1, that's critical. In addition, I would also argue that true immutability means that there is not only zero privilege to go in and flex administration to delete, but also zero access to the ecosystem itself. And that's something we pride ourselves on here at Object First, is the concept that You buy an UTB, you rack and stack it, and you can create S3 keys and S3 buckets, but you have no ability to go into the back end. There's no root, no back end, OS access, any of that, and it's by design. Understanding that, as soon as a simple loophole opens up, the vulnerabilities will flow through and so will the bad actors. Removing that access means that it's one less vector of attack, and minimizing attack surface is probably the most important thing you can do when it comes to maintaining a good backup environment. So is immutability enough? Only if you're doing it correctly, properly, and in a zero trust manner.
Yeah, completely agree. And, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and curious about your take on this, Scott, is, when you look at, let's just call it, threats, data threats in general, doesn't necessarily have to be ransomware, but certainly ransomware is the hot topic today. There's really two potential outcomes that we typically see in the space. And this is where I'd love your take on this, Scott, is, one is the most common. It's going to encrypt and lock your data until you ultimately either pay the ransom or hopefully have a solution like Veeam plus Object First to do a safe recovery. But the other potential scenario is they're going to exploit the data. Let's say you've got confidential information, social security numbers, financial records and data. And, immutability, and this is why I think it's important to touch on, immutability by itself, is certainly a safeguard for scenario one, because you do have backups that are protected, that are recoverable. And if you've been doing Veeams, sure backup to test them, they're recoverable. However, immutability doesn't stop something from reading data. So that data could still be exploited. So essentially, if you're following Veeam's best practices in alignment with ours, you're running Veeam encryption, landing onto our UTB appliance, and then hopefully tearing off to the cloud somewhere. And why I think that's so critical for us, Anthony touched on it earlier, we're designed to be that initial placement, for the Veeam backups to land on. We're not trying to be long-term retention. That's why we recommend 3-2-1 and tear off to the cloud. But Veeam can actually run deduplication and compression, land on us without any performance hits because of the integration that we've got with Veeam. And I think that's critical to touch on, is don't forget about encryption when you think about a ransomware strategy, right? Because there's other things that can happen other than just locking your data.
Absolutely. And you need to safeguard all of that, of these, these integration with other security providers. But more importantly, best practices with security, taking your Veeam environment off of the domain, right? So that it's segregated. These things are critical to do everything you can do. And it's constantly, but it does all start with immutability, right? And with our clients, that's table stakes. You have to do that yesterday. If you don't have it yet, that needs to be the top of your list. And it's been a mad rush to get there for most of our clients, such that we maintain a list of our clients that aren't, right? It's a checkbox, it's table stakes, and we are hounding them if they're not, because we don't want to see the other side of that coin. And we have often where they've been compromised. And we talked about the level of sophistication. You're absolutely right. They may, if they can read it, if they can gain access to it, troll through it. It could be anything from social security numbers, things of that. I got an email from MGM the other day, kind of talking about their remediation activities. But maybe you're a manufacturer and you never even know. They're taking your intellectual property and sending it to another country. So doing everything that you can is absolutely critical. And from an immutability perspective, I think you mentioned a great thing with UTB is that it is an appliance. Highly desirable, I think, for a lot of our clients to have that scenario, because when this first started, you can build Linux immutable repos, and that's great. They work. It's fine, but there's still an OS behind that your security teams need to maintain. Compliance, governance. Are you going to update it? Does it become a threat vector in and of its own right? So larger organizations, that have a Linux team and have, security internal audit, and they stay on top of their stuff. But there's still a human factor in that, right? And to take a simple to use, and that was the greatest thing when we got our first UPI box and our architect plugged it in. I scheduled an hour to do a deep dive. We were done in 15 minutes. He's like, and that took longer than it did to start the thing up. So, when you talk about from an enterprise that may have remote offices, branch offices, they don't have to worry about it. And it's a great solution to drop it in. It's being maintained by somebody else. You can't access it by design, which is great. So you kind of take off the table the insider threat equation, which is becoming very real, right? We see a lot of burnout, and I want to mention it being sensitive to time. I think our biggest challenge as a service provider, because we work, generally speaking, lock and step with our client, teaching the fish while we walk through and do practices. Backup's not their only thing that they do, right? And there are all sorts of conflicting priorities, and people are burned out. Are they going to dot their I's and cross their T's and check that patching of that Linux repo that was built 8 years ago? Or maybe that person left who knew how to build it and the team isn't strong in Linux. So, tremendous opportunity. I think the problem that's being solved by Object First is awesome. And it's back to original Veeam message. Keep it simple, right? I think that's, if you can do it, where you can do it, you absolutely should.
Yeah, completely agree.
Absolutely. So, Scott, one of the other topics we had talked about pre-show, I'd love for you to elaborate on is we were talking, and it's kind of where we came up with this random old saying, right? Do you know where your kids are at? Do you know where your files are? Can you talk to some of the outliers, Enterprise, SMB, some of the corner cases? Because for me, certainly our company and our solution is really geared towards mid-market. However, there will be some outliers that are great, opportunities for us as well as yourself in partnership with Veeam in the SMB space, the enterprise space, and really it boils down to data sizes more so than the traditional employee counts and location counts, right? So can you talk on some of that?
Yeah. I would say that the whole segmentation thing can be a real misleading concept, right? And enterprise versus SMB, even state and local. City of New York probably has the last network on the planet through their school system. So you think one thing, or you think data sizes, right? In my career, I worked with a hedge fund that had 6 people and petabytes of data years ago. So it's really not one size fits all. And from an architecture perspective, you have to understand the company and what it does. Are they multinational? Do they have small branch offices? We worked with an international organization while I was at Veeam that had remote offices all over the world. And one of their environments was running off of batteries and got trampled by elephants, right? So you can't really assume anything in that bucket that you put the enterprises. A lot of them have a lot at the edge, right? A lot of remote offices. If you have remote offices, you may not want to drop the system in there, but you still want immutability within that office. A great fit for that. Your SMB could still be a lot of, a lot of data involved, a lot of sophistication. They may be working with the government. Just because they're not a 1,000-person organization doesn't mean that they're not making a whole component for a defense application. And they need to make sure compliance is in order. So having something is simple. The smaller the organization, the wider the breadth of the technical person running it, right? Washer, we like to say, they're doing the network, they're doing backup, they're provisioning new servers. Having something not to worry about, saying, hey, I know I'm secure, nobody can get at this thing. Peace of mind is top of mind. So, I think really looking at how business is each and every client, which is what we do when we do, assessments for Veeam and throw solutions out. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of make this fit in a lot of scenarios.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you touched on, endpoints a little bit there and, thinking back to the whole resiliency summit. I mean, that's so important, when you look at data security, so much so that Veeam just partnered with Sophos, right? So it's like there's a huge effort to try to do everything humanly possible to protect the livelihood of all these businesses. And that's the data, obviously. And, it can't just live in one place on one vehicle. It's got to live in multiple locations. You've got to think about security every step along the way. And just like we preach here, it's like, look, not every customer has the geography to go to the cloud. Like they may be in a rural location due to bandwidth issues. Maybe they've got unlimited budget, but based on their physical location, they don't have the ability to send the bulk of their data to the cloud to mark it immutable. So this is yet another great solution and opportunity for us to drop in as an on-prem immutable option. And Scott, one of the other things I'm curious if you hear a lot about, from your side of the house is cybersecurity insurance. This is becoming a bigger topic, in today's climate. And premiums, as we've, been looking online and hearing from people, have started to skyrocket if customers don't have immutability on-prem. So when you think about the easiest, least, amount of effort to drop immutability into Veeam deployments, I mean, you're staring at it in the face, right? It's a checkbox. It's enabled out of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that. I mean, cybersecurity insurance is a big deal. It's doubling every year as it would. I mean, if you think of what hurricanes do, yeah, they're a big hit. And then, but this is happening constantly across all segments. So they're taking it very seriously. I mentioned that small feeder defense contractor. We've got a lot of clients in that space. We're seeing a lot more awareness around the NIST framework being mentioned. The government's leaning on their suppliers to ensure that their data is protected. And yeah, immutability is table stakes. And I recently had a conversation with one of our clients who was driven to looking for immutable solutions because their insurance company said, all right, well, we're coming on site to do an audit before we renew your cyber liability insurance. And
Yep.
they said, he said, these are our critical systems. You're following the 3210 rule, and you're moving data up into, a hyperscaler cloud. You said you can recover, and your RTO says, 45 minutes. Show us. They actually came on site, sat down with the backup administrator and walked through it. So, when you look at the actuary science, and I spent some time in insurance myself, there's a lot of control about that. And so more data is better. And you're seeing people not take for granted, hey, fill out the spreadsheet. All right, they look good, rubber stamp. Not when you're losing millions and billions of dollars. So
Yeah.
you have to have immutability, or you may be forced into it quick when your insurance policy.
Totally. And, one other thing I just thought about, because you mentioned, different size environments and some of the larger deployments. And this really, it just came to mind. It resonated from the summit 2 days ago. Veeam has had Sure Backup for years and years and years, right? We were talking about that, Scott, while we were both at Veeam. But one of the things I thought was a really innovative modification to that they're rolling in 12.1 is the ability to randomize the testing. And when you look at enterprise deployments and even upmarket, mid-market deployments, let's say there's 200 or 300 VMs that are being backed up. I mean, the idea of actually testing every single one of those VMs every night, it's not really feasible because you've got to turn them on, fire them up, do some script tests, turn them off. And yes, you can do several in parallel, but that's resource availability, right? So I think that was a really creative thing that they added or they will be adding in 12.1, the ability to randomize that. So literally you can tell it, let's do 5 at a time, but pick random VMs each night. And that way you can start implementing these automated testing practices, which everybody should be doing, testing to some degree to make sure that, hey, look, it doesn't matter if you've got 20 backups all over the world and they're all marked immutable. What if you never tested them to begin with? You may be marking something read only that was never recoverable to begin with. So I do think testing is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and we do quite a lot of work setting up Sure Backup for clients. It's an incredible capability that is still in its infancy from an adoption perspective, in my opinion. Back I mentioned working in insurance, we used to have our security team blow up production environments with active scans, right? There's some red button security scans that if you do them, you smoke the environment, SQL injection, things of that nature. And that's one of the areas where I first sold Sure Backup when I was still at Veeam is, go ahead and test that SQL injection script that would take your production environment down. You can do that in an isolated network. So having a storage platform that can handle that IO and empower those security teams to enhance their capabilities without impacting production. And by the way, they took no blame. They said, hey, it should have been patched. You're bad, not ours. Right.
Yeah.
Except, our clients aren't getting claims processed at the moment. Thanks for that. It definitely helps. So those are all things that we can guide and help our clients kind of roll out.
Well, I know that we're coming up on the 30-minute mark here. So Scott, I do want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I know I learned a lot. One thing I love about this show is we don't pregame. We do everything off the cuff and live. So I always walk away learning more than I did when I started. So thank you for bringing the stories. Thank you for bringing the insight and the knowledge. We got a QR code over there. Scan that, and that'll get you access into the Lillis Technology Group and their information. And just again, Scott, thanks for being here. Any closing thoughts?
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Really excited about Object First, and excited for you guys having a seat at the table at a similar evolution to an Andre and Ratmir company. I remember when we launched Sure Backup originally, or Instant VM Recovery, first market with that capability. And just to be able to walk onto a client's site and say, hey, I'm going to show you this new capability, and I challenge you to tell me it's not the coolest thing since vMotion. It's really good stuff. So very excited to see the innovation that goes into this project. That the team behind it is absolutely proven, and it's going to be a great ride. So appreciate the opportunity to be here.
We appreciate having you. And I also want to encourage, Matt, you beat me to the punch. I was going to see how quickly you can get that QR code up for Box to Backup. But if you'd like to learn more about UTB and what we're doing, Matt and I have an amazing series on YouTube called Box to Backup in 15 minutes. I don't even think it's 15 minutes long. I think it's just a nice round number we chose to, make it sound snappy. It's quicker than that, but that's how we roll here. Check that out. That will answer every question you could ever have about UTB and more. And you'll get a full, complete unboxing to demonstration experience. So you can understand exactly how it will work in your Veeam environment. Matt, any closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, we've touched on a lot of stuff, man. One of the things that I feel like we've got to, kind of end on is we always talk that, our three main marketing pillars and the ideals in which we try to do everything here at the company: secure, simple, and powerful. All of those have to work together, right? Because there's a lot of solutions that say they're simple and they're not, right? There's plenty of solutions you can get that maybe are powerful and simple, but they're not secure, right? So there's always going to be a sacrifice if you look at those three core pillars. And that's why, when Ratmir and Andre, started developing this company, and by the way, that's been several years in the making. We did just launch in February, but this company has been in development for several years from an R&D standpoint. And those were top of mind when building the solution to custom integrate with Veeam specifically. Don't have to change block sizes. You don't have to do any custom configuration with the Veeam deployment. You literally just drop it in and roll. And, there's a ton more technical advantages that we can get into on another discussion. And we've got YouTube videos on all that stuff as well. But, smart object storage API integration is one key differentiator. So be sure to reach out to us, engage. We're happy to, sync up with your teams and get on calls and have further discussions. Love to work with Scott over at the Lillis Group, certainly. So any type of collaboration we can do, Veeam plus Object First, plus Scott over with his team, we would love that. So we've got the QR codes for contact. Thanks everyone again for the time. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure to get to rap with you a little bit, from all the old days. And I remember when Veeam came out with that, we won like best of show back in the day, right? For that one feature at VMworld. So it was truly game changing, which is exactly what we're trying to do here.
Awesome.
Thanks, Matt. And just for our audience, it is, spooky season. The end is approaching, as it is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, like I mentioned in the beginning. So stay safe out there if you're trick-or-treating with the little ones, and keep track of where those files are. Have a great one, y'all. Oh,
all right, guys.
There we go.
See you on the next one.